Grettis Ásmundarsonar. GRETTIR'S SAGA. Chapter 1. There was a man named Onund, who was the son of Ulf Clubfoot, the son of Ivar the Smiter. Onund was brother of Gudbjorg, the mother of Gudbrand Ball, the father of Asta, the mother of King Olaf the Saint. Onund was an uplander by the kin of his mother, but the kin of his father dwelt chiefly about Rogaland and Hordaland. He was a great Viking and went harrying west over the sea. Balk of Sotans, the son of Blang, was with him herein, and Orm the wealthy withal, and Halvard was the name of the third of them. They had 5 ships, all well manned, and therewith they harried in the South Isles, and when they came to Bara, they found there a king called Kjarval, and he too had 5 ships. They went to battle with him, and a hard fought there. The men of Onund were of the eagerest, and on either side many fell dead. But the end of it was that the king fled with only 1 ship. So there the men of Onund took both ships and much wealth, and abode there through the winter. For 3 summers they harried throughout Ireland and Scotland, and thereafter went to Norway. Chapter 2. In those days were there the great troubles in Norway. Harald the Unshorn, son of Halfdan the Black, was pushing forth for the kingdom. Before that he was the king of the uplands. Then he went north through the land, and had many battles there, and ever won the day. Thereafter he harried south in the land, and wheresoever he came, laid all under him. But when he came to Hordaland, swarms of folk came thronging against him, and their captains were Kjotvi the wealthy, and Thorir Longchin, and those of South Rogaland, and King Sulki. Geirmund Helskin was then in the west over the sea, nor was he in this battle, though he had kingdom in Hordaland. Now that autumn, Onund and his fellows came from the west over the sea, and when Thorir Longchin and King Kjotvi heard thereof, they sent men to meet them, and prayed them for help, and promised them honours. Then they entered into fellowship with Thorir and his men, for they were exceeding fain to try their strength, and said that there would be there always the fight was hottest. Now was the meeting with Harald the king in Rogaland, and that firth which is called Hafrsfjord, and both sides had many men. This was the greatest battle that has ever been fought in Norway, and hereof most sagas tell. For of those in evermost told, of whom the sagas are made, and thereto came folk from all the land, and many from other lands, and swarms of Vikings. Now Onund laid his ship alongside one board of the ship of Thorir Longchin, about the midst of the fleet, but King Harald laid his on the other board, because Thorir was the greatest berserker, and the stoutest of men, so the fight was of the fiercest on either side. Then the king cried on his berserkers for an onslaught, and they were called the wolf coats, for on them would be no steel bite, and when they set on, not might withstand them. Thorir defended him very stoutly, and fell in on all hardihood on board his ship. Then was it cleared from stem to stern, and cut from the grapplings, and let drift astern betwixt the other ships. Thereafter the king's men laid their ship alongside Onund's, and he was in the forepart thereof, and fought manly. Then the king's folk said, Lo, a forward man in the forecastle there, let him have somewhat to mind him how know that we is in battle. Now Onund put 1 foot out over the bulwark, and dealt a blow at a man, and even therewith a spear was aimed at him. And as he put the blow from him, he bent backward withal, and one of the king's forecastle men smote at him, and the stroke took his leg below the knee, and sheared it clean off, and forthwith made him unmeet for fight. Then fell the more part of the folk on board his ship, but Onund was brought to the ship of him who was called Thrond, and he was the son of Bjorn, and brother of Eyvind the Eastman. He was in the fight against King Harald and lay on board of Onund's ship. But now after these things the more part of the fleet scattered in flight. Thrond and his men with the other Vikings got them away each as he might and sailed west over the sea. Onund went with him, and Bolk and Hallvard sweeping. Onund was healed but went with a wooden leg all his life after. Therefore as long as he lived he was called Onund Treefoot. Chapter 3. At that time were many great men west over the sea, such as fled from the lands in Norway before King Harald, because he had made all of them outlaws, who had met with him in battle, and taken to him their possessions. So when Onund was healed of his wounds, he and Thrond went to meet Geirmund Helskin, because he was one of the most famed of Vikings west over the sea. And they asked him whether he had any mind to seek after that kingdom which he had in Orderland, and offered him their fellowship herein, for they deemed they had a sore loss of their lands there, since Onund was both mighty and of great kin. Geirmund said that so great had grown the strength of King Harald that he deemed there was little hope that they would win honor in their war with him when men had been worsted, even when all the folk of the land had been drawn together, and yet with all that he was loath to become a king's thrall and pray for that which was his own, that he would find somewhat better to do that now too he was no longer young. So Onund and his fellows went back to the South Isles, and there they met many of the friends. There was a man named Ulf by name, who was by named Grettir. He was the son of Einar, the son of Olfir Bernkarl. He was the brother to Olaf the Broad, the father of Thormod Shaft. Steinulf was the name of Olfir Bernkarl's son. He was the father of Una, whom Thorbjorn Salmenkarl had to wife. Another son of Olfir Bernkarl was Steinmod, the father of Kolnal, who was the father of Aldis of Bara. The son of Kolnal was Steinmod, the father of Haldora, the wife of Eilif, the son of Ketil the one-handed. Uffe Grettir had to wife Asni, the daughter of Vestar Hengsson, and Esmond the beardless, and Asbjorn were the sons of Uffe Grettir. But his daughters were these, Aldis and Asa and Ásfjord. Uffe had fled away west over the sea before Harald the king, and so had Thormod Shaft, his kinsman, had with their kith and kin, and they harried in Scotland, and far and wide west beyond the sea. Now Thrond and Onund Treefoot made west for Ireland, to find Eyvind the Eastman, Thrond's brother, who was landward along the coasts of Ireland. The mother of Eyvind was Hilf, the daughter of Rolf, son of Ingjold, the son of King Frodi, but Thrond's mother was Helga, the daughter of Ondott the Crow. Bjorn was the name of the father of Eyvind the Thrond. He was the son of Rolf from He had to flee from Gotland, for that he had burned in his house Sigfast, the son-in-law of King Solver, and thereafter had he gone to Norway, and was the next winter with Grim the Herser, the son of Kolbjorn the Abasha. Now Grim had a mind to murder Bjorn for his money, so he fled thence to Ondott the Crow, who dwelt in Hivensfirth in Ogdir. He received Bjorn well, and Bjorn was with him in the winter, but was in warfare in summertide, until Lif his wife died, and after that Ondott gave Bjorn Helga his daughter, and then Bjorn left off warring. Now thereon Eyvind took to him the warships of his father, and was become a great chief west over the sea. He wedded Rafata, the daughter of Kjarval, the king of Ireland. Their sons were Helgi the Lean and Snæbjorn. So when Thrond and Onund came to the South Isles, there they met Uffe Grettir and Thormod Shaft, and great friendship grew up between them, for each thought he had gained from Hel the last who had been left behind in Norway, while the troubles there were at the highest. But Onund was exceeding moody, and when Thrond marked it, he asked what he was brooding over in his mind. Onund answered and sang this stave. What joy since that day can I get, when shield fires thunder last I met, or too soon clutch the claws of ill, for that axe edge shall grieve me still. In eyes of fighting man and thane, my strength and manhood are but vain. This is the thing that makes me grow, a joyless man, is it, ye know? Thrond answered that whereso he was, he would still be deemed a brave man, and now it is meet for thee to settle down and get married, and I would put forth my word and help, if I but knew where to look. Onund said he did in manly wise, but that his good hope for matches of any gain was gone now. Thrond answered, Ufa has a daughter who is called Asa. Thitherward will we return if it seem good to you. Onund showed that he was willing enough, so afterwards they talked the matter over with Ufa. He answered well and said that he knew not what Onund was, a man of great kin and rich of chattels. But his land, said he, I put it low worth, nor do I deem him to be a hale man, and withal my daughter is but a child. Thrond said that Onund was a brisker man yet than many who were hale of both legs, and so by Thrond's help was this bargain struck. Ufa was given to his daughter but chattels for dowry, because those lands that were in Norway neither would lay down any money for. A little after Thrond wooed the daughter of Thormod Shaft, both were set in troth for 3 winters. So thereafter they went to harrying in the summer, but were in Bara in the winter tide. Chapter 4. There were 2 Vikings called Vigbjord and Vestmar. They were South Islanders, and they lay out both winter and summer. They had 13 ships, and harried mostly in Ireland, and did many an ill deed there, till Eyvind the Eastman took the landward ship. Thereafter they got them gone to the South Isles, and harried there and all about the firths of Scotland. Against these went Thrond and Onund, and heard that they had sailed to that island, which is called Bute. Now Onund and his folk came there with 5 ships, and when the Vikings see their ships and know how many they are, they deem they have enough strength gathered there, and take their weapons, and lay their ships in the midst between 2 cliffs. There was a great and deep sound, only on one side could they be set on, that would but 5 ships at once. Now Onund was the wisest of men, and bade lay 5 ships up into the sound, so that he and his might have a back when they would, for there was plenty of sea room astern. On one board of them too was a certain island, and under the lee thereof he let one ship lie, and his men brought many great stones forth onto the sheer cliffs above, yet might not be seen withal from the ships. Now the Vikings laid their ships boldly enough for the attack, and thought that the others quailed, and Vigbjord asked who they thought they were in such jeopardy. Thrond said that he was the brother of Eyvind the Eastman, and here beside me is Onund Treefoot, my fellow. Then laughed the Vikings and shouted, Treefoot, Treefoot, foot of tree, trolls take thee and thy company. Yea, a sight is seldom seen of us, that such men should go into battle as have no might over themselves. Onund said that they could not know thereof of what had tried, and withal they laid their ships alongside one of the other, and there began a great fight, and either side did fight boldly. But when they came to handy blows, Onund gave back toward the cliff, and when the Vikings saw this, they deemed he was minded to flee, and made towards his ship, and came as nigh to the cliff as they might. But in that very point of time those came forth onto the edge of the cliff, who were appointed to do so, and sent at the Vikings so great a flight of stones that they might not withstand it. Then fell many of the Viking folk, and others were hurt so that they might not bear weapon, and withal they were fain to draw back, and might not, because their ships were even then come unto the narrowest of the sound, and they were huddled together both by the ships and the stream. But Onund and his men set on fiercely, whereas Vigbjord was but Thrond set on Vestmar, and won little thereby. So when the folk were thinned on Vigbjord's ship, Onund's men and Onund himself got ready to board her, that Vigbjord saw and cheered on his men without stint, that he turned to meet Onund, and the more part fled before him. But Onund bade his men mark how it meant between them, for he was of huge strength. Now they set the log of wood under Onund's knee so that he stood firmly, and now the Viking fought his way forward along the ship till he reached Onund, and he smote at him with his sword, and he took the shield and sheared off all it met, and then the sword drove into the log that Onund had under his knee, and struck fast therein, and Vigbjord stooped in, drawing it out, and even therewith Onund smote at his shoulder in such wise that he cut the arm from off of him, and then was the Viking unmeet for battle. But when Vestmar knew that his fellow was fallen, he leaped into the furthermost ship and fled with all those who might reach her. Thereafter they ransacked the fallen men, and by then was Vigbjord nigh to his death. Onund went up to him and sang, "Ye seest thou wide wounds bleed, what of shrinking did thou heed? In the 1-foot sling of gold, what scratch here dost thou behold? And in such wise as this, many an axe breaker there is, strong of tongue and weak of hand, tried thou wert, and mightst not stand." So there they took much spoil, and sailed back to Bara in the autumn. Chapter 5. The summer after this they made ready to fare west to Ireland. But at that time Bolk and Hallvard betook themselves from the lands west over the sea, and went out to Iceland, for thence came tales of land good to choose. Bolk settled land in Hafrsfjord, and dwelt at either Bolkstead. Hallvard settled Sweepingsfirth, and Hallwick out to the Stair, and dwelt there. Now Thrond and Onund met Eyvind the Eastman, and he received his brother well. But when he knew that Onund was come with him, then he waxed wroth, and would fain set on him. Thrond bade him to do it not, and said that it was not for him to wage war against Northmen, and least of all such men as fear peaceably. Eyvind said that he fared otherwise before, and had broken the peace of Kjarval the king, and that he should now pay for all. Many words the brothers had over this, till Thrond said at last that one fate should befall both him and Onund, and then Eyvind let himself be appeased. So they dwelt there long that summer, and went on warfare with Eyvind, who found Onund to be the bravest of men. In the autumn they fared to the South Isles, and Eyvind gave to Thrond to take all the heritage of their father, if Bjorn should die before Thrond. Now were the twain in the South Isles until they wedded their wives, and some winters passed. Chapter 6. And now it came to pass that Bjorn the father of Thrond died, and when Grim the Herser hears thereof, he went to meet Onund Crow, and claimed the goods left by Bjorn. But Onund said that Thrond had the heritage after his father. Grim said that Thrond was west over seas, and that Bjorn was a Gothlander of kin, and that King took the heritage of all outland men. Onund said that he should keep the goods for the hands of Thrond, his daughter's son, and therewith Grim gat him gone, and had naught for the claiming of the goods. Now Thrond had news of his father's death, and straightway got ready to go from the South Isles, and Onund Treefoot went with him. But Uffe Grettir and Thormod Shaft went out to Iceland with their kith and kin, and came out to the Ares in the south country, and dwelt their first winter with Thorbjorn Salm and Karl. Thereafter they settled Knupward's rape, Uffe the outward part, between Thord River and Calf River, and he dwelt at Uffe's stead by Stoneholt, but Thormod settled the eastward part, and abode at Shaftholt. The daughters of Thormod were these: Thorvor, mother of Thora the Godi of Halti, and Thora, mother of Thorstein the Godi, the father of Bjarni the sage. Now it is to be said of Thrond and Onund that they sailed from the lands west over the sea toward Norway, and had fair wind, and such speed that no rumour of their voyage was abroad till they came to Onund Crow. He gave Thrond good welcome, and told him how Grim the Herser had claimed the heritage left by Bjorn. Bute, it seems to me, kinsman, said he, that thou take the heritage of thy father and not king's thrall. Good luck has befallen thee, in that none knows of my coming, but it misdoubts me that Grim will come upon one or other of us if he may. Therefore I would that you should take the inheritance to you and get thee gone to other lands. Thrawn said that so he would do, so he took them with the chattels and got away from Norway at his speediest. But before he sailed into the sea, he asked Onund Treefoot whether he would make for Iceland with him. Onund said he would first go with his kin and friends in the south country. Thrawn said, Then must we part now, but I would that thou should aid my kin, for on them will vengeance fall if I get off clear. But to Iceland shall I go, and I would that thou would withal make that journey. Onund gave his word to all, and they parted in good love. So Thrawn went to Iceland, and Uffe and Thormod Shaft received him well. Thrawn dwelt at Thrawn's Holt, which is west of Stias River. Chapter 7. Onund went south to Rogaland, and met there many of his kin and friends. He dwelt there in secret at a man's called Kolbein. Now he heard that the king had taken his lands to him and set the man thereover, who was called Harek, who was a farmer of the king's. So on a night Onund went to him, and took him in his house. There Harek was led out and cut down, and Onund took all the chattels they found and burnt the homestead, and thereafter he abode in many places that winter. But that autumn Grim the Herser slew Ulf Crow, because he might not get the heritage money for the king. And that same night of his slaying, Signy, his wife, brought aboard ship all her chattels, and fared with her sons, Ásmund and Ásgrim, to Sigvat, her father. But a little after sent her sons to Soknadola, to Hetin, her foster father. But that seemed good to them but for a little while, and they would fain go back again to their mother. So they departed and came at Yule-tide to Ingjold the trusty at Vin. He took them in because of the urgency of Gyda his wife, and they were there the winter through. But in spring came Onund north to Ogdir, because he heard of the slaying of Ulf Crow. But when he found Signy, he asked her what help she would have of him. She said that she would fain have vengeance on Grim the Herser for the slaying of Onund. Then there were the sons of Onund sent for, and when they met Onund Treefoot, they made up one fellowship together, and had spies abroad on the doings of Grim. Now in the summer was a great ale drinking held at Grim's, because he had bidden to him Earl Auden, and when Onund and the sons of Onund knew thereof, they went to Grim's homestead, and laid fire to the house. For they were come there unawares, and burnt Grim the Herser therein, and nigh 30 men, and many good things they took therewithal. Then went Onund to the woods, but the sons of Onund took a boat of Ingjold's their foster father, and rowed away therein, and lay hid a little while of the homestead. Earl Auden came to the feast, even as he had been settled afore, and there missed friend from stead. Then he gathered men to him, and dwelt there some nights, but naught was heard of Onund and his fellows, and the earl slept in a loft with 2 men. Onund had full tidings from the homestead, and sent after those brothers, and when they met, Onund asked them whether they would watch the farm or fall on the earl, but they chose to set on the earl. So they drove beams at the loft doors and broke them in. Then Ásmund caught hold of the 2 who were with the earl, and cast them down so hard that they were well nigh slain. But Ásgrim ran at the earl, and bade him render up Wergild for his father, since he been in the plot and onslaught with Grim the Herser when Ulf Crow was slain. The earl said he had no money with him, and prayed for delay of the payment. Then Ásgrim set his spear point to the earl's breast, and bade him pay there and then. So the earl took a chain from his neck and 3 gold rings, and a cloak of rich web, and gave them up. Ásgrim took the goods and gave the earl a name, and called him Auden Goti. But when the bonders and neighbouring folk were well aware that war was come among them, they went abroad and would bring help to the earl, and a hard fight there was, for Onund had many men, and there fell many good bonders and courtmen of the earl. Now came the brothers, and told how they had fared with the earl, and Onund said that it was ill that he was not slain. That would have been somewhat of a revenge on the king for our loss at his hands of fee and friends. They said that this was a greater shame to the earl, and therewith they went up to Soradolla to Eirikr Alfheim, the king's lord, and he took them in for all winter. Now at Yule they drank turn and turn about with a man called Halstein, who was by named Horse. Eirikr gave the first feast, well and truly, and then Halstein gave his. But thereat was there bickering between them, and Halstein smote Eirikr with a deer horn. Eirikr got no revenge therefore, but went home straightway. This sore misliked the sons of Ondott, and a little after Ásgrim fared to Halstein's homestead, and went in alone, and gave him a great wound. But those who were therewith sprang up and set on Ásgrim. Ásgrim defended himself well, and got out their hands in the dark, but they deemed they had slain him. Onund and Ásmund heard thereof and supposed him dead, but deemed they might do naught. Eirikr counselled them to make for Iceland, and said that they would be of no avail to abide there in the land, Norway, as soon as the king should bring matters about to his liking. So they did, and made them ready for Iceland, and had each one ship. Halstein lay wounded, and died before Onund and his folk sailed. Kolbein withal, who is aforementioned, went abroad with Onund. Chapter 8. Now Onund and Ásmund sailed into the sea when they were ready, and held company together. Then sang Onund this stave: Meet was I in days agone, for storm wherein sweeping one, midst rain of swords and the dart's breath, blew over all a gale of death. Now a maimed, one-footed man, on roller's steed through waters wan, out to Iceland must I go, or the scald is sinking low. They had a hard voyage of it, and much of baffling gales from the south, and drove north into the main. But they made Iceland, and were by then come to the north of Long Ness, when they found where they were. So little space there was between them that they spoke together, and Ásmund said that they had beset to Islefirth, and thereto they both agreed. Then they beat up toward the land, and a southeast wind sprang up. But when Onund and his folk laid the ship close to the wind, the yard was sprung, and they took in sail, and therewith were driven off to sea. But Ásmund got under the lee of Brockisle, and there they lay till a fair wind brought him into Islefirth. Helgi the Lean gave him all the craiglings lithe, and he dwelt at South Glass River. Ásgrim his brother came out some winters later and abode at North Glass River, and he was the father of Elidegrim, the father of Ásgrim, Elidegrimsson. Chapter 9. Now it is to be told of Onund Treefoot that he drove out to sea for certain days, but at last the wind got round to the north, and they sailed for land. Then those knew who had been there before that they came west off the Skagi. Then they sailed into Strand Bay, and near to the south strands, and there rowed toward them 6 men in a 10-oared boat, who hailed the big ship, and asked who was their captain. Onund named himself, and asked why they came. They said they were the housecarls of Thorvald from Drongar. Onund asked if all land through the strands had been settled. They said there was little unsettled in the inner strands, and none north thereof. Then Onund asked his shipmates whether they would make for the west country, or take such as they had been told of. They chose to view the land first, so they sailed in up the bay, and brought to in a creek off Arness, then put forth a boat and rowed to land. There dwelt a rich man, Eric Snare, who had taken land between Ingolfirth and Ifura in Fishless. But when Eirikr knew that Onund was come there, he bade him take of his hands whatso he would, but said there was little that had not been settled before. Onund said he would first see what there was, so they went landward south past some firths till they came to Ufora. Then said he, Eirikr, here is what there is to look for. All from here is unsettled, and right into the settlements of Bjorn. Now a great mountain went down the eastern side of the firth, and snow had fallen thereon. Onund looked on that mountain and sang, Brand wet as life, awry doth go, fair lands and wide full well I know. Past house and field and fold of man, the swift steed of the rollers ran. My lands and kin I left behind, that I this latter day might find. Cold back for sunny meads to have, hard fate a bitter bargain drave. Eirikr answered, Many have lost so much in Norway, that it may not be bettered, and I think withal that lost lands in the main settlements already settled, and therefore I urge thee not to go from hence. But I shall hold to what I spoke, and thou may have whatever of land seems to me thee. Onund said that he would take that offer, and so he settled land out from Ufora over the 3 creeks, Birgis Creek, Kolbein's Creek, and Coldback Creek, up to Coldback Cleft. Thereafter Eirikr gave him all the Fishless and Reek Firth and all of Reek Ness, out on that side of the firth. But as to drifts there was not set forth, for they were then so plentiful that every man had of them he would. Now Onund set up a household at Coldback, and had many men about him. But when his goods began to grow great, he had another steed at Reek Firth. Kolbein dwelt at Kolbein's Creek, so Onund abode in peace for certain winters. Chapter 10. Now Onund was so brisk a man that few, even of whole men, could cope with him, and his name withal was well known throughout the land because of his forefathers. After these things befell that strife between Uffe Grettir and Thorbjorn Earl's champion, which had such ending that Uffe fell before Thorbjorn in Grettir's gill near Heel. There were many drawn together to the sons of Uffe concerning the blood suit, and Onund Treefoot was sent for, and rode south in the spring, and getted it Vam, with Aud the deeply wealthy, and she gave him exceeding good welcome, because he had been with her west over the sea. In those days Olaf Felen, her son's son, was a man full grown, and Aud was by then worn with great eld. She bade Onund know that she would have Olaf her kinsman married, and was fain that he should woo Aldous of Bara, who was cousin to Asa, whom Onund had to wife. Onund deemed the matter hopeful, and Olaf rode south with him. So when Onund met his friends and kin-in-law, they bade him abide with them. Then was the suit talked over, and was laid to Kjalarnes thing, for as then the Alþingi was not yet set up. So the case was settled by Umperadam, and heavy weregild came for the slayings, and Thorbjorn Earl's champion was outlawed. His son was Solmund, the father of Kari the Singed. Father and son have dwelt abroad and long time afterwards. Thrond bade Onund and Olaf to his house, and so did Thormod Shaft, and they backed Olaf's wooing, which was settled with ease, because men knew how mighty a woman Aud was. So the bargain was made, and so much being done, Onund rode home, and Aud thanked him well for his help to Olaf. That autumn, Olaf Felin wedded Aldias of Bara, and then died Aud the deeply wealthy, as is told in the story of the Laxdala men. Chapter 11. Onund and Asa had 2 sons. The elder was called Thorgir, the younger Uffe Grettir, but Asa soon died. Thereafter Onund got to wife a woman called Thordis, the daughter of Thorgrim, from Gnup in Midfirth, and akin to Midfirth Skeggi. Of her Onund had a son called Thorgrim. He was early a big man, and a strong, wise, and good withal in matters of husbandry. Onund dwelt on at Coldback till he was old. Then he died in his bed, and is buried in Treefoot's barrow. He was the briskest and lightest of one-footed men who have ever lived in Iceland. Now Thorgrim took the lead among the sons of Onund, though others of them were older than he, but when he was 25 years old he grew grey-haired, and therefore was he by-named Greypate. Thordis, his mother, was afterwards wedded north in Willowdale to Audun Skokul, and their son was Asgir of Asgir's river. Thorgrim, Greypate, and his brothers had great possessions in common, nor did they divide the goods between them. Now Eric, who farmed at Arnes, as is forementioned, had to wife Alaf, daughter of Ingolf of Ingolsfirth, and Flosi was the name of their son, a hopeful man and of many friends. In those days 3 brothers came out hither, Ingolf, Uffe, and Eyvind, and settled those 3 firths that are known by their names. Olaf was the name of Eyvind's son. He first dwelt at Eyvind's firth, and after at Drongar, and was a man to hold his own well. Now there was no strife between these men when their elders were alive, but when Eric died, it seemed to Flosi that those of Coldback had no lawful title to the lands which Eric had given to Onund, and from this befell much ill blood between them. But Thorgrim and his kin still held their lands as before, but they might not risk having sports together. Now Thorgir was headman of the household of those brothers in Ríkfirth, and would ever be rowing out of fishing, because he in those days were the firths full of fish. So those in the creek made up their plot. A man there was a housecarl of Flosi and Arnes called Thorfinn. Him Flosi sent for Thorgir's head, and he went and hid himself in the boat stand that morning. Thorgir got ready to row out to sea, and 2 men with him, one called Hamund, the other Brand. Thorgir went first, and had on his back a leather bottle and drink therein. It was very dark. As he walked down from the boat stand, Thorfinn ran at him and smote him with an axe between the shoulders, and the axe sank in, and the bottle squeaked. But he let go the axe, for he deemed that there would be little need of binding up, and would save himself as swiftly as might be. And it is told of him that he ran after Arnes, and came there before broad day, and told of Thorgir's slaying, and said that he should have need of Flosi's shelter, and that the only thing to be done was to offer atonement, for that of all things, he said, is like to be better hour straight, great as it has now grown. Flosi said that he would first hear tidings, and I am minded to think thou art afraid after thy big deed. Now it is to be said of Thorgir that he turned from the blow as the axe smote the bottle, nor had he any wound. They made no search for the man because of the dark, so they rowed over the firths to Coldback, and told tidings of what had happened. Thereat folk made much mocking, and called Thorgir Bottleback, and that was by name ever after. And this was sung withal, the brave men of days old, whereof many a tale is told, bathed the whiting of the shield in wound's house on battlefield, but the honour-missing fool, both sides of his slaying tool, since fate hot his hand made vain, with but curdled milk must stain. Chapter 12. In those days befell such hard times in Iceland, that naught like them has been known there. Well nigh all gettings from the sea, and all drifts came to an end, and this went on for many seasons. One autumn certain chapmen in a big ship were drifted there, and were wrecked there in the creek, and Flosi took him 4 or 5 of them. Stein was the name of their captain. They were housed here and there about the creek, and were minded to build them a new ship from the wreck, but they were unhandy therein, and the ship was over small stem and stern, but over big amidships. That spring befell a great storm from the north, which lasted near a week, and after the storm men looked after their drifts. Now there was a man called Thorstein, and dwelt at Ríkness. He found a whale driven up on the firthward side of the Ness, at a place called Ribscaries, and the whale was a big whale. Thorstein sent forth with a messenger to Wick to Flossie, and so the nighest farmsteads. Now Einar was the name of the farmer at Combe, and he was a tenant of those at Coldback, and had the ward of their drifts on that side of the firths, and now withal he was aware of the stranding of the whale. And he took boat and rowed past the firths to Burgess Creek, whence he sent a man to Coldback, and when Thorgrim and his brothers heard that, they got ready at their swiftest, and were 12 in a 10-oared boat, and Kolbein's sons fared with him, Ivar and Leif, and were 6 altogether, and all farmers who could bring it in went about to get the whale. Now it is to be told of Flosi that he sent to his kin in Ingolsfirth and Ufisfirth, and for Olaf Eyvind's son, who then dwelt at Drangar, and Flosi came first to the whale with the men of Wick, when they fell to cutting up the whale, and was with cut forthwith sent ashore. Near 20 men went thereafter at first, but soon folk came thronging in. Therewith came those of Coldback in 4 boats, and Thorgrim laid claim to the whale, and forbade the men of Wick to shear a lot or carry off any of the meat. Flosi bade him show if Eric had given Onund Treefoot the drift in clear terms, or else he said he should defend himself with arms. Thorgrim thought that he and his too few, and would not risk of battle. But therewith came a boat rowing up the firth, and the rowers therein pulled smartly. Soon they came up, and there was Swan from Knoll and beyond Firth, and his housecarls, and straightway when he came, he bade Thorgrim not to let himself be robbed. And great friends they had been thereof, and now Swan offered his aid. The brothers said they would take it, and therewith set on fiercely. Thorgir Bottleback first mounted the whale, and against Flosi's housecarls, there the aforenamed Thorfinn was cutting the whale. He was in front nigh the head, and stood in a foothold he had cut for himself. Then Thorgir said, Herewith I bring thee back thy axe, and smote him on the neck, and struck his head clean off. Flosi was up on the foreshore when he saw that, and he egged on his men to meet them hardily. Now they fought long together, but those of Coldback had the best of it. Few men there had weapons except with axes wherewith they were cutting up the whale, and some choppers. So the men of Wick gave back to the foreshores. The Eastmen had weapons, and many a wound they gave. Stein the captain smote a foot off of Ivar Kolbein's son, but Leif Ivar's brother beat to death a fellow of Stein's with a whale rib. Blows were dwelt there with whatever could be caught at, and men fell on either side. But now came up Olaf and his men from Drangar in many boats, and gave help to Flosi. Then those of Coldback were borne back overpowered. But they had loaded their boats already, and Swan bade get aboard, and therewith gave back, and the men of Wick came on after them. And when Swan was come down to the sea, he smote at Stein, the sea captain, and gave him a great wound, and then leapt aboard his boat. Thorgrim wounded Flosi with a great wound, therewith got away. Olaf cut at Ufa Grettir, and wounded him to death. But Thorgir cut Ufa up, and leapt aboard with him. Now those of Coldback rode east by the firths, and those they parted, and this was sung of their meeting. At Ribscaries I hear folk tell, a hard and dreadful fray befell. For men unarmed upon that day, with strips of whale fat made good play. Fierce steel gods these in turn did meet, with blubber slices nowise sweet. Certes a wretched thing it is, to tell of squabbles such as this. After these things was peace settled between them, and these suits were laid to the Althingi. There Thorod the Goatee and Midfirth Skeggi, with many of the south country folk, aided those of Coldback. Flosi was outlawed, and many of those with him who had been, and his monies were greatly drained because he chose to pay up all Wergild himself. Thorgrim and his folk could not show that they had paid money for the lands and drifts which Flosi claimed. Thorkel Moon was lawman then, and he was forbidden to give his decision. He said that to him it seemed law that something had been paid for those lands, though mayhap not their full worth. For so did Steinvor the Old to Ingolf my grandfather, that she had from him all as Rome's whaleness, and gave therefore a spotted cloak, nor has that gift been voided, though certes greater law for therein, but here I lay down my rede. Said he that the land be shared, and that both sides have equal parts therein, and henceforth be it made law that each man have the drifts before his own lands. Now this was done, and the land was so divided that Thorgrim and his folk had to give up Ríksfjörð and all the lands by the firth side, but Combe they were kept still. Ufa was atoned with a great sum, Thorfinn was unatoned, and Bute was given to Thorgir for the attack on his life. And thereafter were they set at one again. Flosi took ship for Norway with Stein the shipmaster, and sold his lands in the Wick to Geirmund Hjuka Timber, who dwelt there afterwards. Now that ship which the chapmen had made was very broad of beam, so that men called it the Tree Tub, and by the name is the creek known. But in that keel did Flosi go out, but was driven back to Axfirth, whereof came to the tale of Bodmod and Grimulf the Gerper. Chapter 13. Now after this the brothers Thorgrim and Thorgir shared their possessions. Thorgrim took the chattels and Thorgir the land. Thorgrim betook himself to Midfirth and bought land at Bjarg by the council of Skeggi. He had to wife Thordis, daughter of Asmund of Asmund's Peak, who had settled the Thingiri lands. Thorgrim and Thordis had a son who was called Asmund. He was a big man and strong, wise, and the fairest haired of men, but his head grew grey early, whereof he was called Asmund the grey-haired. Thorgrim grew to be a man very busy about his household, and kept all his well to their work. Asmund would do but little work, so the father and son had small fellowship together, and so things fared till Asmund had grown of age. Then he asked his father for travelling money. Thorgrim said he should have little enough, but gave him somewhat of huckstering wares. Then Asmund went abroad, and his goods soon grew great. He sailed to sundry lands, and became the greatest of merchants and very rich. He was a man well beloved and trusty, and many kinsmen he had in Norway of great birth. One autumn he guested east in the Wick with a great man who was called Thorstein. He was an uplander of kin, and had a sister called Ronvig, one to be chosen before all women. Her Asmund wooed, and gained her by the help of Thorstein's brother, and there Asmund dwelt a while, and was held in good esteem. He had of Ronvig a son, hight Thorstein, strong and fairest of men, and great of voice. A man tall of growth he was, but somewhat slow in his mien, and therefore was called Dromund. Now when Thorstein was nigh grown up, his mother fell sick and died, and thereafter Asmund had no joy in Norway. The kin of Thorstein's mother took his goods, and him withal to foster. But Asmund betook himself once more to seafaring, and became a man of great renown. Now he brought his ship into Hunnawater, and in those days was Thorkel Krofla chief over the Waterdale folk, and he heard of Asmund's coming out, and rode to the ship and bade Asmund to his house, and he dwelt at Marstead in Waterdale, so Asmund went to be guest there. This Thorkel was the son of Thorgrim the Godi of Corn River, and was a very wise man. Now this was after the coming out of Bishop Frederick and Thorvald Conrad's son, and they dwelt at the brook's meet. When these things came to pass, they were the first to preach the law of Christ in the north country. Thorkel let himself be signed with the cross, and many men with him, and things now betid between the bishop and the north country folk, which come to not into this tale. Now at Thorkel's was a woman brought up, Asdis by name, who was the daughter of Bard, the son of Jokul, the son of Ingemund the Old, and the son of Thorstein, the son of Ketil the Huge. The mother of Asdis was Aldis, the daughter of Ufa Grettir, as is forementioned. Asdis was as yet unwedded, and was deemed the best match among women. both for her kin and her possessions. Ásmund was grown weary of seafaring, and was fain to take up his abode in Iceland, so he took up the word and wooed this woman. Thorkel knew well all his ways. He was a rich man and of good counsel to hold his wealth, so that came about that Ásmund got Asdis his wife. He became a bosom friend of Thorkel, and a great dealer in matters of farming, cunning in the law and far-reaching. And now a little after this Thorgrim Greypate died at Bjarg, and Ásmund took the heritage after him and dwelt there.